the way that you do something matters as much as what you're doing, meaning the relationships you build with people are the thing that will come back around and that will become your co-founders or friends or partners or clients.
Welcome to another episode of Chief Influencer. I'm your host, Anthony Shop, co-founder of Social Driver. Let's face it, Washington is the center of influence in the US and arguably in the world. Chief Influencer features leaders who have figured out how to break through in today's fragmented and fast-changing environment. Social Driver teamed up with the Communications Board and the George Washington University College of Professional Studies to recognize these incredible leaders as chief influencers and highlight how they inspire and influence others. I'm thrilled to welcome today's guest, Christian Tom, CEO and co-founder of And Media, a new media venture building a values-aligned, creator-led studio system for the next era of digital storytelling and influence. And before we dive in, here are a few things that I think you should know about today's guest. First, Christian has helped shape digital strategy at the highest levels of government. He served as assistant to the president, director of digital strategy at the White House under President Joe Biden, where he led the administration's approach to reaching people across a rapidly changing digital media landscape. Second, he's been at the center of digital media's evolution. Earlier in his career, Christian held leadership roles across some of the most influential platforms and media companies of the modern era, from helping build early monetization efforts at YouTube and working in the early days of Twitter's New York office to serving as publisher at Now This and The Dodo. And third, he has spent his career translating between worlds that are now converging: campaigns, government, media, technology, platforms, and creators. From leading digital partnerships on the Biden 2020 presidential campaign to directing digital strategy for the Biden-Harris inauguration, Christian has helped leaders and institutions understand how influence actually moves in the digital age. Christian, you've been called many things: a digital strategist, a media innovator, and a builder of the creator-led future. Well, today, we're thrilled to call you a chief influencer. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Anthony. It's a very nice introduction, and I'm glad to be here with you.
It was very well deserved. You know, when you and I met, it was through National Digital Roundtable. You were so kind to host a National Digital Roundtable at the White House. And people say at the White House, they sometimes mean the compound. We literally were in the Roosevelt Room at the White House. So it was a pretty special event. And our leaders and innovators there had the opportunity to hear about some of the decisions that you were making. Really advising the most important leaders in the world about how we get our message out. And I want to touch on that soon. But before, I just want to start with And Media, because you're building And Media at a moment when media and creators, platforms and culture, they're all converging. What opportunity did you see that made you think this is the moment to build something new?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I was able to lead the digital office in the Biden White House. And one of the key things that I took away is the idea that politics is downstream from culture, and the need for all elected officials, for campaigns, but also importantly, we were coming, of course, from the official side, from the government side, to, in this kind of meet people where they are phrase, to embrace that in particular as it pertains to digital strategies, and within that, kind of as a subgenre, in the way that people are consuming within digital, which largely now is coming from creators. It's largely coming from media like this, meaning podcasts or clips of podcasts and things that live on social that are built for either vertical video or longer form video. And there's a lot of different kind of tactics within that. But at the highest kind of level, meaning most zoomed out, that's something that I observed an opportunity to not just have a role in, but specifically with my two co-founders to build a new company around. And to us, the idea that the value, the cultural value, the electoral value, but the monetary value in a lot of digital media today, and for the foreseeable future, will be led by creators and led by IP that creators are building, the kind of personality-driven forms of media. And it's a huge tectonic shift in the way people consume information. And there is an opportunity, but there's also really a need to build that infrastructure now. And in some ways, a media company like ours, we refer to it as a venture studio, which is kind of like a portmanteau of the idea of a venture capital company, right, that will invest and fund new ideas, as well as the kind of studio side of the house, meaning the studio part of the word, and the old school Hollywood studios or creative development, and how that's changed, and how there's just this, kind of radical change across all of these industries. And as you said, again, very kindly introduction, a lot of these worlds are now converging. And so what you see is where maybe politics was confined to or existed as a part of Meet the Press or Sunday talk shows or what have you, and entertainment lived in a separate world. And there was, of course, been intermingling, but I mean, it was a more discrete, meaning you could draw kind of a line. All of those things are converging, and I would argue largely in part because of technology, digital, social, and how people receive information today. And so that's part of what the idea of And Media is all about. We really believe in a creator-first future, and part of what we're doing then is working with content creators to help them develop shows, to help them develop repeatable, episodic content that in some ways in a generation or so ago would kind of resemble television, right? These are shows that you may come back to and you want to watch because you love the person who helped to create it. They're not just the star. They're not just the director. They're not just the writer. In fact, maybe a content creator is all of those in one and more. But we want to help fund that to happen. And there's some amazing shows that we've, funded so far that I'd be happy to share with you. But it's all informed by, I think, as you had have said, it's informed by the fact that there's a lot of different parts of, my professional background that I think are now perfectly coming together for this moment and for this venture.
You referenced like the tectonic shift. I love that phrase. So many leaders, I think, obviously they know that, things have changed, but they still think in these traditional categories. Television over here, social media over there, podcast somewhere else. What are folks who think that way missing about how audiences actually consume stories today?
Yeah. There's a great researcher. His name is John Della Volpe. He is a senior leader at the Harvard Institute of Politics. And John every year does, I think it's actually the 50th year, or was last year, 2 years ago. It is a decades-long youth poll that Harvard does, that a bunch of undergraduates and I believe graduate students underneath John's banner at the Institute of Politics do, where they do a youth poll on how people are consuming information. Now, I think a lot of it is public, but there are a number of different resources and researchers around, from Pew Research to others, that will outline it. The reality is that 1 in 5 Americans regularly self-report to get their news from influencers, from content creators. And it's even higher if you look at people who are under 30. And I think what's interesting is it skews young people, but it's a large percentage of Americans. And most importantly, I think even how you categorize news is almost like a loaded phrase. And for better or for worse, I would view it as just how information flows. A lot of what we did in the White House was trying to think about how to reach people in the kind of alternative ways, in new media, in whatever kind of euphemism you want to use. But basically, how can we recognize that people are not necessarily only getting information from a capital J journalist, or from a newspaper, or from even a social media account of a news organization, right, which would still be digital. And the idea that content creators are now the source of this information is both democratizing and powerful. And we've also seen the pernicious and kind of dark underbelly of where there are people who are intentionally bad actors, who are willfully spreading information that is not true. And so to me, the answer is, how can we even use entertainment and fun and cultural content as a means to share information, to share values alignment with people online? I think that is just the reality of where audiences are, where what consumers are, where Americans are. So that is the main thing that I think everyone needs to understand. And then the second part is understand and then hopefully embrace in a way that is true to the values you hold. And part of it is what we've created is a company. We're a C corp. We are not a nonprofit. We're not certainly a C4 political organization. We are a for-profit company, and we want to be a business partner to these content creators. We want to help them grow their influence, grow their reach, grow their monetization, and help to have more content out there in this kind of flywheel and a virtuous cycle where these are standalone businesses that are self-sustaining.
And I know, I mean, I've seen And Media mentioned in the news already. You're showing early momentum from your creator show development, strong YouTube performance, advertiser interest. And obviously those are all really important for the business model. Cause as you mentioned, this is a company. Companies have got to make money. What are some of those early signals telling you about this model? What are you learning as you build this model and think about influence? And, also might be a good time even just to tell us about some of your creators and some of your shows that you alluded to earlier.
Yeah, we've learned a ton, I can tell you. And that's both because there's been successes, but also because there's things that we've learned that we thought could have been amazing and ended up not being perfect. And so you kind of take the good with the bad. That's what learning is, especially in a startup environment. I know we were talking recently in person, Anthony. You're in your 15th year of Social Driver, and that's an amazing accomplishment. So congrats to you all. But part of it is the learnings that come from the early years that are probably instructive in the 15th year and will be instructive in your 30th year. So, it's important to learn from kind of the successes as well as the ones where there's can be improvement. But I will say, I was just in New York a week or two ago for one of the shows that we're producing, which is with a content creator named Kareem Rama, who's great. He has a show called Subway Takes that maybe a number of your audience has seen before. He's also had another show concept that he had started, but then kind of put on hold as Subway Takes started to really take off. The show that we're funding, that I think he has said he has a lot of heart for, that we have a lot of heart for, is called Keep the Meter Running. And it's where Kareem goes and hails a cab and tells someone, "Hey, Anthony, take me to your favorite spot and keep the meter running." And it ends up being kind of like a Tony Bourdain-esque, almost like a travel show. It's a cultural show. You get to know the person, you get to know their culture. And I think part of it is you may take away from it that when you are spending time hearing about a working class story, largely, hearing about an immigrant story, largely, you may walk away from that viewing that from a values perspective, a pluralistic society is a good one, and that immigrant communities can add to the cultural fabric of the country, et cetera, et cetera. But it's not a political show, and I think that's a crucial piece. The reason why we were in New York, though, for Kareem is because Kareem's show was selected as part of a slate. I think probably, I would guess, a dozen or 24 total content creators by YouTube to be presented and put in marquee for their annual event that they call Brandcast, which is where they spotlight the biggest content creators for the Madison Avenue advertising community. And so to me, you asked about kind of monetization. It's a good example of not only does Kareem have a lot of cultural capital, not only does he have a lot of reach and kind of the numbers and the subscribers on YouTube that are growing, et cetera, but he was identified by YouTube to be one of the star assets to go and drive monetization for their, global CMOs in the audience. And so we see that as a really big win right off the bat. We've also pursued a number of other almost like distribution and partnership deals for some of our content creator shows where, my two co-founders and I worked together in the White House, worked together on some campaigns, but for the majority of our careers did not come from politics. And so leveraging some of our expertise, our know-how, and our relationships in the private sector, in media, in technology, in platforms has been really helpful. So we also have two distribution deals with media companies. One is with Higher Ground, and it is for a show called Stories from a Stranger with a creator named Hunter Prosper. It's a show that takes what Hunter has done to 10 million plus followers on kind of a short form vertical format and brings it into a long form YouTube version. So it's kind of expanding him and putting him on a new surface that he's always wanted to do. Hunter has almost in like a radio example, he has almost like a Studs Terkel kind of a storytelling ability to extract from people to have them open up to share and provide the kind of vulnerability with real strangers that he meets on the street. And then the other one that we're working on is with a comedian named Matt Michelle. He does a lot of fun kind of like walk and talk comedy videos in New York. He's a former writer for Jimmy Fallon, and he has a show that takes him into the more kind of traditional podcast setting, something he also has aspired to do for some time, and that And Media is helping to enable him to do. In that case, we're working with Vox Media to help do a lot of the distribution, to do some of the monetization, the marketing. And so in that case, part of what we aim to do is take some of our friends in the broader media industry and work with them to bring an amazing show to help lift up a content creator that we're working with, and then in the monetization or the marketing to actually help to raise it up even further.
To go back for a second, you mentioned that YouTube Brandcast and having, Kareem being featured as part of that. Congratulations. That's pretty cool for him and for you. Is that, for me, I'm not like a person who has deep expertise in the entertainment world. Many of our listeners may not either. That sounds like what a traditional TV network would have done annually, where they would say like, look at this new sitcom, slate that we have on Thursday nights to get advertisers excited. That's what's happening in the creator-driven world and the streaming world too, it sounds like. And so when you talk about that convergence, it's just I don't know about that. So that's kind of interesting. And it just makes me think about how brands want to show up to be part of these. They've become mainstream in that way.
You're totally right. And I should give the context, Anthony, like the Brandcast event that YouTube does, they've done it for some number of years, is quite literally, as you just said, during the television upfronts week, which is exactly that. And the reason why YouTube has found themselves to be a player in this is because they are now able to compete with television. I think Neil Mohan, who's the CEO of YouTube, recently said there are more minutes, there's more time spent on YouTube on television sets than on mobile devices.
Yeah.
You'd think, mobile is everything, and it's a huge number for YouTube. But the argument I think that YouTube is trying to make is they have even more time spent on televisions. That is the entertainment medium that so many people now consume from, with shows like Kareem's, which is a large, usually 20-minute episodes, not dissimilar. You're absolutely right, from a sitcom of eras past. And so, how can YouTube go and work with those same advertisers who are in town in New York for the television upfronts? They see themselves as competing in that space, and we see ourselves as a media company who's helping to produce one of those shows as being therefore one of the key drivers of the cultural conversation of today.
Yeah. And I want to underscore what you just said, because we recently had a national digital roundtable event with the Embassy of Sweden, and we talked about kind of media trends, and we had a top YouTube creator there who has reaches millions of people a month with political content. And then we had somebody from the DC office of YouTube. And this came up. More than half of the time consumed on YouTube actually happens on televisions. And someone asked the question, oh, well, does that count YouTube TV if I subscribe to, TV channels through YouTube? Because you can do that now. And they said, no, that's not counting that type of that cable equivalent. It's just YouTube content alone. And everyone in the room was really shocked at that number, And then I think when we all took a step back and thought about our own habits, I'm like, oh yeah, actually, I do watch a fair bit of YouTube on TV, even if it's like, music videos when friends are over or something like that. There's certainly a lot of that. And so building a media apparatus so that you can influence the people who are and reach the people who are consuming media that way, they're consuming it very differently. And it's such a mix, right? Because it's like, I might watch I watch all my SNL clips on YouTube, for example. I just like consuming SNL that way. Sure. But I'm also watching, piano tutorials from individuals who are, teaching me how to play a song. So it's a whole mix of content. And that is the consumer experience on a platform.
Yep. No, I think that's exactly right. And how can we program content that is tailor built for that experience is exactly what we are trying to do. There's a Derek Thompson post from I think maybe October of last year, maybe you could link to it in the article and in the
Yeah.
episode.
Put it in the show notes.
And it's called, the title of his post is called "Everything is Television." And it's a really thoughtful post, and he delves into some of the data around what he means by that is that entertainment has moved in that direction. He talks about how social media platforms are actually not in the way that we expect social, as in updates from friends only. And he has some of the data that was in a Meta FTC filing talking about the percentage of total posts in your feed that come from friends, which is small, as opposed to the percentage of posts in your feed this is on across the platform. So I think Facebook and Instagram, et cetera, that come from other accounts or from media entities or from creators.
Yeah.
Kind of underscoring the point that YouTube, as you just shared from the latest National Digital Roundtable, but even the feed-based social platforms that one might think are largely friends and social media, even that format has changed. And so to us, to And Media, to like colleagues and co-founders Landon and Aisha, we are focused on how do you go and recognize that shift in consumer behavior, this tectonic shift, yes. And how does that impact, of course, all sorts of outcomes? Yeah. It can be commercial outcomes, as in getting people to buy your product. It can be political outcomes or, advocacy-ish based outcomes, and everything in between, including entertainment, including fun, including what shapes your kind of your moral compass. I think those are all in one feed now.
Yeah. And, it makes me also think of a recent update is, Meta launched a new app called Forum, which puts all of the Facebook groups in one place if you want to ask questions or and Facebook has obviously become much more like television, as you described, right? You're seeing a lot more content come through that is not from your friends. And it kind of made me wonder if is that kind of breaking that off. So we're seeing just every day, every month, there's some sort of update that we see.
Sure.
In evolution. And we know creators are driving so much content. We're all seeing content from creators. Sometimes those are creators that started out as creators. Sometimes that's a journalist who now is creating short form content. If you talk to any brand, any institution, many of them say, we want to work with creators. Yep. But they sometimes are treating creators just like another media buy. They might be going to a transactional platform where they can, pay $50 for one post. And when we've had, and you've been part of some of these National Digital Roundtable events, creators always say, we don't want a transaction. We want a partnership. And often when I look at people who want to work with creators, what do? They kind of pitch it as a transaction. So you work so closely with creators and you have across your career. What does a real creator partnership look like when it's done well?
Yeah, it's a good, it's a great question. I think it depends. Right, I have different answers to the question based on the role that you're playing. Because from a funding model and coming from a financier like we are as And Media, it is a need to, and part of the key thing that we believe is recognizing that the creator is, in fact, the originator of so much of what makes the show what it is. Meaning, they aren't just quote unquote the face of the show. They aren't just the person.
They're not the newsreader in the old days, right?
That's exactly right. That's right. And they're also not just the people that have a lot of followers on a particular platform or something like that, right? It is, they are an integral part of it. In fact, in many cases, as I shared with some of the ones that we are creators we're working with now, these are shows that are things they've had as kind of like their baby for a long time and have been looking for and seeking the opportunity to fund. And then we're able to go in and fill that gap. And so I think as a funder, I think that's the key thing. It is not about the editorial control or anything like that. It is about letting someone and believing, if you are wanting to fund them, believing that they have the ability to go and execute on the vision overall. I think you raise another question, which is how do you do that well from a brand or advertiser standpoint? I think part of it is working with a great firm like Social Driver to help manage that, because I think part of it is you want to have the right relationship with the creator, the right relationship with the client, and there needs to be an understanding or a translation, I suppose, between how to get that message across and not. I can tell you though, the number of times that any kind of creator campaign even kicks off well in general. And you can look at any number of creators who speak about this publicly, and the brand will come to them and say, well, hey, how come it didn't do as well? And we're looking at the overall numbers. Here's your average post, and here's the post that this did, or the numbers that this particular branded post did, right? And in large part, you can attribute that to when a brand has gone and prescribed the way that the creator should say something. There are a lot of causes potentially, and each campaign will be different. But I think probably if I had to venture, one of the number one causes of where you'd see that underperformance is because of that. And the reason is because it would be perhaps seen by their audience as inauthentic, or audiences are savvy and they can tell when something is not said in the way that they're used to, that they like to hear, that they, by its very definition, followed this creator and have built this parasocial relationship with them over. And so I would say to brands, when you venture down a creator-led campaign, in the same way that we as the financier are going to go and have a certain amount of trust with the creator, so too should you. And I understand there's any number of brand safety guidelines, any number of things that you're trying to make sure you hit as messaging, but that is the devil is in the details on that particular way of working. And it is just different, as you said, from a billboard. It's different from a piece of creative that you're doing paid media behind to place it on a particular piece of out of home, or a mailer, or digital, or television, or radio. It just is not the same format. And understanding that, having trusted partners, both staff who maybe do it, agencies who do it, or creator direct relationships. I think there has to be, and I think that may happen also, by the way, over the course of repeated work. So a one-off engagement, nothing wrong with that. And a value exchange being transactional is on the face of it, of course, totally fine. But I would also argue that dipping your toe in the water and then coming back and trying it a number of times, perhaps even with the same creator, could be a way to develop that rapport, because a creator may not know exactly, like, hearing how you are trying to message as well. And I think that is where the creator economy, because it is about human to human connection and relationship building and content, needs to have that level of respect and trust and working style.
I'm so glad you brought up trust, because I want to kind of get into this, but I think something that I just sort of occurred to me as you were describing this, I want to make sure I characterized it right, is, look, if I'm an institution, I'm a brand, and I want to work with a creator, what am I trying to do? I want to borrow their trust to reach people, right? With the type of content they create, but the audience that they have cultivated. And yet, if I approach that in a very transactional way, and in a way where I prescribe what they say, well, I'm not demonstrating trust with the partner that I'm working with that creator. So if you don't have trust at the beginning in the relationship, how do you expect to borrow and leverage that trust to reach the end audience? And if we look at successful creator partnerships, they do start with that trust. And I think you really established as well, though, Christian, which is, you don't immediately have trust on day one with the first time. So you may dip your toe in the water. You may work with somebody repeatedly. But if the leader is listening to this and they're hearing kind of your expertise on this, if your goal is to work with a creator so that you can leverage the trust that they've built with an audience to get your message out to that audience and kind of and borrow that trust, I'll say, then don't you need to trust that creator? Don't you need to establish a relationship that is trusted on both sides? And I think that is often what's missing. And I haven't just heard anybody kind of put it the way you put it. So for me, that was a bit of it clicked with me.
Yeah, I think you said it really well. Totally. Yeah.
This episode is brought to you by the George Washington University's College of Professional Studies. With in-person and online programs ranging from master's degrees in public relations strategy to certificate programs in digital communications, GW offers more than just the credentials to help working professionals get ahead. It prepares them to be leaders in their field. Check out cps.gwu.edu for more information. So we talk about trust, obviously, in moments of public urgency, public health, crisis response, misinformation. I mean, trust is very important for us to establish so that we can get the right message out to the right people at the right time, do it quickly. I'd like you to talk a little bit about, and this can be creators, but you have a lot of experience also just with platforms and strategies to do this. How leaders should decide where to show up and how to communicate when the stakes are high. And I know that when you were in the White House, this is something that came up a lot. And you were the person who advised the president of the United States in crisis situations about who should the messenger be? What platform should we use? How should we do this? And so I really want to make sure we have a chance to cover this with you because very few people have had the opportunity to deal with these situations at the level that you have, Christian.
Sure, I can totally give you. I can maybe give you two examples,
Right.
And one can be from White House work, and one can maybe be from the work we're doing at Ant Media. So on the White House side, you're right. What immediately comes to mind is, if you recall, in the fall of 2024, there were two really bad hurricanes that came through, devastated parts of North Carolina and then Florida. And we had been attempting best we could to get out public information messaging on digital as well as other channels. And there was a big misinformation problem. And I don't know exactly the source of them entirely, but this was also kind of in that election period. And we were posting our content from, and I was working on the official side, as I mentioned. So we were not posting electoral content at all. We were really focused on giving people information they need to seek aid and demonstrate what the federal government was doing in concert with state agencies, et cetera, et cetera. And so one particular tactic that the platforms team in the Office of Digital Strategy did was open a White House Reddit account. And it received some earned media attention. And it was something that the team had been thinking about for some time. And so props go to Megan Coyne on the team, who had been really leading the charge to think about how best to use a service and a brand new platform for the White House at all. And the reason why Reddit was a successful tactic is because we were able to go and post messages from the White House in specific, if you use Reddit, or for audience members to do, in specific subreddits that really allowed us to reach people who needed to hear the information. And I'll give you an example. I remember there was a post that we did from the White House account, and we posted it on Twitter, X, as well as other places. And I remember on Twitter, it shows a public impression count. So as I recall, this particular post that I'm thinking of had something in the order of 700,000 impressions, which was actually kind of modest given the size of the following, et cetera, et cetera. And so we knew that we needed to do more. And I remember that on Reddit, when we posted it to the r/North Carolina subreddit, that same post with the same words, the same kind of update around the aid that was being delivered to North Carolina, received, because the analytics were visible, I believe, on the back end, something on the order of 800 or 850,000 impressions, meaning more than on Twitter. And I thought to myself, okay, this is really something, because the tweets or the posts on X can be seen by anyone, but also, therefore, that number includes everyone.
Yeah.
And people who are going to a North Carolina subreddit, I don't know their geography, but they are at some level opting in and caring about North Carolina as a place, and especially in a moment like this, in a moment of crisis and need.
Yeah.
And so, to me, it illustrated, if you look at the numbers, a stark opportunity and difference. I also think it represented the idea that here was a White House not going to talk about broad legislative accomplishments or how we were helping North Carolinians with any number of Inflation Reduction Act funding of new infrastructure or what have you. It was about, when people needed to hear it, what was happening and where you could actually find more resources to seek the aid yourself. So I use that as a good example, I think, of in terms of how to think creatively, how to think in somewhat kind of real time, and leverage tools in front of us. In some cases, in that example, an entirely new platform, period, to appear.
And if you're a head of comms or a leader hearing that story and you aren't paying attention to your brand's mentions on Reddit, or you don't have an account, you probably are going, maybe I should check out Reddit right now. because I think that's a pretty eye-opening story.
Totally. I mean, I think Reddit is an amazing platform, and they've gone through a number of different periods, but they have come to a point where I think they have built a lot of, again, as you pointed out, trust, but trust with their audiences or with their communities and these subreddits, because there's a mechanism of people upvoting, downvoting, and they've built something native to what people on the platform do. So that's an example from kind of White House side. I will say, in the kind of how do you deal with misinformation and these moments of urgency or crisis or uncertainty. There's a show that we are funding at And Media, which is called The Moment Live. It's two hosts, Meredith and Rebecca, they're hilarious, they're fun and funny. They definitely talk about both pop culture and culture, as well as issues of substance that really matter to people, and they care a lot about key issues. The format that they have is a live show that they then clip out. They are the only female-led live news show online. It's called The Moment Live. And I mention it because what Meredith and Rebecca are doing, I think, as it pertains to maybe a second, newer facet of where misinformation can pop up, I believe that by virtue of doing a live show, as it's kind of becoming more in vogue to do, they are also combating the AI slop out there, and their live content model, where they are broadcasting to their audiences, I think is one of the ways that we can ensure that you have real people, in this case, sharing out the information. And Meredith and Rebecca do it in a really, again, fun, engaging way, whether you catch it live or you actually end up viewing it as kind of like a clip subsequently on social.
Do people pitch them to try to get them to talk about their issues so that there's a way, you don't have to build your own platform, but you can leverage? What does that look like with creators
I mean, they have done an amazing job bringing on elected officials, talking about again, kind of more fun and cultural issues, as well as, and they do such a good job combining these into a single stream, as well as really serious and important topics. I'll give you an example. They just had last week Representative Joaquin Castro, and he talked with them about the Dilley Detention Center. And subsequent to that, Meredith and Rebecca put together a fundraiser for an organization that helps to fund commissary accounts for people detained at this detention center. And it did spectacularly well, and they were able to mobilize their audience to go and take action to make a donation to help people. So I think you could go from that to talking about hilarious things that are happening online, and to be able to do it all in one and do it in a live format is really, really powerful.
So one of the things I'm curious about, I remember back, I worked for a congressional campaign back in the 2008 cycle. And back then, it felt like political campaigns were pushing digital innovation that the private sector later adopted. A couple of years after that, we started our company, and, Honda said, hey, can you help us launch a Twitter account for, our public affairs? So it seemed like politics was sort of driving digital innovation. Do you think that's still true, or have brands and creators and media companies moved ahead of politics?
That's a good question. I think there's a lot to learn from the private sector. And I'm not sure that means in every single way the private sector leads. But I do think there are a lot of comparison points broadly to the kind of brand awareness and how that translates to persuasion in political language, or a direct response campaign for a brand that's looking to drive a purchase or something like that, meaning kind of lower in the funnel. In political world is more of a mobilization kind of messaging, right? They're kind of parallels, and you could imagine kind of like a chart almost that shows on one side what people in politics call it, and then on one side what people in brand and advertising world call it. And I would argue it's because you're trying to drive, in both cases, people to understand who you are, what you believe, and then ultimately to take an action based off of that and feel compelled to do it. So I'm not sure which one's leading the other, but I really think that the opportunities to commingle and to learn from each other are there. And
Yeah.
to shout out, Anthony, you mentioned that you hosted the National Digital Roundtable for some time. I think the fact that you had a content creator there and working with YouTube, the platform, I think there is just so much to learn from people who are kind of like half a concentric ring away from what you do in life. And I love that you all, when I've participated in National Digital Roundtables and otherwise have worked with embassies, because you can learn a lot from the way that people from other countries do something.
Yeah, absolutely.
And operate from their embassy in the same way that, you may learn from your organization. So I think that to me is maybe my takeaway from private sector, public sector, from Americans doing it versus the way the Swedes do it,
Yeah.
or what have you.
Well, thanks for saying that. Yeah, I mean, I've just found that when you get people with very different backgrounds in the same room, you're undoubtedly going to learn from one another, because
Absolutely.
we're all in our lanes each day, and what's day to day for someone else might be very innovative for you. So, that's
Absolutely.
been, and one of the things I want to ask you about, I mean, we talked a lot about creators, and we were talking about kind of the crisis message and getting that out. You've also just worked with so many leaders. And when you work with leaders in an organization, getting your message out through your corporate brand and your logo is one way of doing it. Getting it out through trusted messengers like creators is another way to do it. But sometimes you just have to get it out from the spokesperson you have, whether that's the president or the CEO or the ambassador or whatever. What advice do you have for leaders who are thinking about how they venture out to get their face out there, their message out there through these platforms, but maintain authenticity? Because there's this balance of control, controlling the message and what you're comfortable with, and leveraging new platforms and making sure you show up as a real human in a way that resonates. I'd just love to hear your take on that, because I hear this question from so many of the leaders we work with, the chief influencers we interview, et cetera.
Sure. I think it's a bit of knowing your audience. And I know that, Social Driver probably works with any number of groups who have actually a pretty well-defined, specific, targeted audience. And in that case, knowing how to speak to them is a really probably well-honed craft, and maybe relatively fixed, as in clear. I think if you are looking to reach a larger audience, a consumer audience, where there can be so many different ways that people consume content, my suggestion is to try things out and be comfortable with, or actually embrace, failure. And I say that because the only way that you will see what's working is by trying it, and the understandable and natural hesitation to be more conservative, or to think about the downside risk is again totally understandable. But I don't know if that's going to be able to push the innovation. And again, that may not be content creators. It may be your CEO recording things. It may be, and it could be variations of what already exists. I think you have to be okay with that. And if an organization is not prepared to do that, I totally understand. There has to be kind of like a 70-20-10 in my mind of what are you experimenting with, and how are you trying to push your own organization. I remember when I worked at Google, and this is in 2009, and I remember Larry and Sergey, the co-founders, got up on stage at TGIF. That was the kind of end of the week company meeting, and that was what it was called. And we went from probably people having a few beers or something on a Friday afternoon when it was a startup, to like a thing that they would broadcast live to different offices. And they said at one point they were doing these quarterly, they called them OKRs, objectives and key results. So these are like for teams, and I mean like for Gmail, the organization, right? Zoomed out as well as an individual or smaller teams. And I remember they said something along the lines of, and I think Laszlo Bock, who ended up running people operations at Google for some time, maybe wrote a book that outlined some of this. So I maybe, with apologies to him, butchering part of it. But they made the point of saying, and at one of these TGIFs that I watched on a live stream or attended in person in Mountain View, California, I remember he said, if you are hitting in your OKRs, when we look at the quarterly review, more than 70% of it, that's actually not good. I remember thinking to myself, how is that not good? First of all, that's like a 70%, isn't that high of a percent? And their whole point was, it means if you're hitting 80 or 90% of your goals, you probably didn't set your goals high enough. Now, it's also bad if you hit 2% of your goals, of course, I'm sure they would say. But I think the reason why I bring that up in the context of what you're saying, Anthony, is I think there needs to be a willingness to try out new things. And that means if you use the Larry and Sergey model, maybe 30, each organization will have a different threshold, but maybe 30% or some percent may not work. And what your risk tolerance is may be different in different settings and whatnot, but I think it can be also dangerous to try only to test, and like, meaning internal, and like, we have to do a RCT to make sure that messaging works perfectly before you also have to try saying things and seeing what lands with people and doing it in a smart way, right? Not just throwing spaghetti against the wall. But I do think that the willingness to venture outside of your comfort zone is a key part of it, and a hard thing to resist.
Yeah. Are there leaders you observe, whether they're in politics and public service or just corporate, that you think are doing a good job experimenting? They're showing up in your feed and you're like, oh, this is somebody who's really, they're out there figuring it out and it's landing. I think Gretchen Whitmer does a great job. I've seen her just post some things that are kind of funny memes, but that are like really Michigan centric. She did a thing about, I think it's called Verner's soda, which is like, my Michigan friends and relatives like know about that. Other people don't. Sure. And I just kind of feel like she's, I don't know, doesn't seem like she's moving too far outside of the zone of who she really is. But at the same time, it's not like cringy. I mean, at least for me, I just, she's somebody who I've just thought, okay, this is somebody who can do this in a way that most governors or senators cannot.
Yeah, no, I think it is things like that, which require some amount of bravery. I really think, from whether you're an elected official, whether you're a corporate leader or otherwise. So I think that spirit is worth us, trying for.
As we kind of get toward the end here, I just have a couple more questions for you, but just looking ahead, you're obviously on the cutting edge of what's happening in the creator economy, in the world of media. Where do you see the next frontier of influence? And what do you think leaders should be paying attention to? I mean, if we're thinking about building to the next, 5 years, what are some things on your radar that you think the CEO of a company, of an association, or the head of communications should be paying attention to today?
I think a lot of trends are cyclical, and I am actively, I would, to those who would listen to my opinion, I think would encourage people to think about what are the things that are where the pendulum may swing one way and then swing back. And that can be in terms of in kind of media mindset formats that may return and kind of have be reborn in a new way for a new generation. It could be reception and openness to new technologies that get embraced and then get shunned, or get shunned and then embraced. So I think that to me is just a dynamic that happens all the time, and it can hit and manifest in any number of ways. But that to me is like, an opportunity.
That's such a great point. I was just in a roundtable the other day talking about, we were talking about kind of trends with websites and GEO. We were saying, everything used to be about these long PDFs, and then it sort of shifted like, oh, you don't want to do those long PDFs. Well, it turns out AI loves the long authoritative PDFs with authors. So publishing those can be really great for your discovery through, ChatGPT and
really
other
good
LLMs. Point. And so that's one example, I think, of the pendulum. So I'm going to make myself sound really smart by in those settings saying, where's the pendulum shifted and where might it come back?
Right.
And Christian, somebody told me once in Washington, the first time you say it, I say, oh, my friend Christian Tom always says. And then the second time I'll say, as a friend of mine always says. And then the third time I say, as I always say.
Right.
So, but no, I'll give you credit. Lastly, I just want to ask you, I love just asking every one of our guests, you just had such an incredible career, and you have a lot of runway ahead of you, but you've done so much in a short amount of time. You've seen so much. How do you define influence today, and how has that changed for you? How has your definition of influence changed over your career thus far?
I take your question to be about, um, influence in a capital I influencer way, sure. But I also think the question gets to kind of leadership and how to uh, how to influence an organization. And I have come to believe that the way that you do something matters as much as what you're doing. Meaning, um, the relationships you build with people are the thing that will come back around, and um, that will become your co-founders or friends or partners or clients. And I think influence in that way is about kind of like a way of operating, and you never know what will come back around. I will give you an example that pertains to kind of in media. One of the content creators we are working with now, some number of months ago, we jumped on a call. We had talked to this person's management and agent. We've been talking about, potentially doing a deal together and what that would look like. And so this was kind of maybe not the final, but the penultimate call with the talent himself, right? Kind of like, okay, so everyone's on, and people are doing their intros in a Zoom format like this. And the person goes, "Wow, Christian Tom." I said, "Oh yeah," but not like in a bad way, but in like a way that clearly meant something to them. So they're on the computer, and there's the talent. So the talent being the talent, other people are going, and like very clearly pulls up their phone and starts typing something, looking for something. I don't know. And people continue. And a few minutes later, they come off mute and they start reading an email, right? That's here. And it's an email addressed to them, right? So it says like, "Dear Anthony, thank you so much for your email. It was great to meet you. If you have any more questions about the position, please let me know. Best, Christian." And so it wasn't entirely clear to me what was going on. And the person said, "Christian, in 2012, I interviewed with you at Twitter." This person worked in New York. They worked in media and other companies as well. And I said, "Oh man, I didn't really remember that. I guess it didn't work out." And I said, "It was maybe for the better, otherwise we would be sitting here right now together." And he said, "Yeah, the reason why I remembered it, and the reason why I said, oh, Christian, like, why do I kind of know that name? Is because you were the only person when you do the perfunctory, if you do an interview, dear Anthony, thanks for meeting with me, et cetera, et cetera. You're the only person who wrote back. And you send off the thank you notes as he did, and as you should in an interview. To anyone who's listening, you should do that." And he remembered it because out of all of the people he interviewed with, it, because the way that Twitter did it was kind of like a panel, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 interviews, I responded. And it wasn't a very long email back, but it was to acknowledge and have that respect for him as a person. And I mentioned it to say that's not the reason why we ended up working together or not, right? This person was going to hopefully work with us on the business terms and because of our shared vision and all the things that And Media stands for that I shared with you a bit today. But I mean it to say, when you asked about influence, to me, that's influence as in, oh man, you could have, Christian, in a busy day, totally neglected by accident to respond to them. But I guess I made the effort. I tried to remember to just write back a quick note to say, "Hey, thanks, good to meet you," as well. And you never know when something like that will come back around.
Yeah. I love that story, Christian. And I think, it really underlies the idea of influence is so much about how we make people feel, right? Not
Sure.
just
Very well said.
persuading
Yes.
them to take a specific action. And when we think about the conversation that we've had today about your experience in technology, in government, and now in this sort of new frontier, Wild West, as you called it, of a venture studio, so much of what you're talking about is culture. Culture
Yeah.
is upstream from politics. And what's culture so much about is like how we feel about ourselves, how we feel about
Totally.
our relationships with others. And I really appreciated some of the examples you gave, and we'll put them in the show notes about some of the creators you work with and some of the shows you're producing, which aren't political in nature. And yet they do have this element of how we want people to feel about themselves and how we want them to feel about their relationship in our society and with others, which is so important. And some of the advice you gave today, I think, if folks are checking this out and they said, okay, this is somebody who works in the creator economy, what am I going to hear from him? Well, you talked about the importance of experimenting on different platforms and experimenting with the way you show up through your personal brand. And, that might not be the idea of innovating and trying new things might not be surprising to those folks. And you gave some great examples that they can take away. But then you talked so much about trust and relationships. And, the pendulum might swing from the thing that is really trendy now back to something else. And actually, for me, that is some of the best advice that you gave, and also some of the things that people might be more surprised about if they just came in knowing that, you're an expert in the creator economy and the new media world. So I love that you took us on a journey that covered both elements of that. I think that was really great. It makes this conversation something that I know anybody listening right now as we wrap up will be able to take something away from. And that's a really good way for us, I think, to bring it to a close is with the fantastic example that you gave about a conversation you had, back in 2012 and how that person still remembers the way you made them feel. And now I can see what you're doing as you are helping to identify these creators and funding these creators and their shows through and media. And they're reaching millions of people and they're taking off and you're getting a lot of buzz. Why is that happening? It's because of how you're making people feel. And in a world where so much digital media obviously is outrage driven, we know that, we know how algorithms work. It's not that. It's making people feel good. And isn't that a great place for us to take the culture? So I'm really excited for folks to check out some of the things that you're working on. I've checked out some of them. I'm excited to dive in deeper on some more of them myself. And I just
Awesome.
want to say thanks for taking the time to share with us so much about what you're doing now, your journey, and wow, whatever we're doing in comms or leadership or influence, some great lessons that we heard from you today, Christian. So thank you.
Oh, thanks, Anthony. It's good to chat with you as always.
Chief Influencer is a production of Social Driver. We help clients transform complexity into clarity with people-centered strategies. Whether you're looking to elevate the influence of your brand or of your leaders, check out socialdriver.com to learn more. For show notes or to nominate a guest, visit us at chiefinfluencer.org or follow Chief Influencer on LinkedIn.